Today I got a really cool video for you guys. So this is the AB Night Vision RVM-14. This is a newer housing by AB Night Vision, and I'm going to build this out with an ELBIT white phosphor tube to show you what the process is for building one out and whether it's easier or about the same as building out a traditional PVS-14. But that's not all. I am also going to compare this housing with your traditional PVS-14 housing to show you what the differences are. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we are going to discuss is the construction of this housing. So the RVM-14 is an all aluminum housing, whereas the PVS-14 is a polymer housing. And there is a weight difference. The RVM-14 housing is slightly lighter, and I am going to show you what the weights are right here. So right off the start, it is a lighter housing, which, every ounce counts when you're mounting this on your head. So that's a pretty cool difference. And next, we will talk about the purge port. So on the RVM-14, the purging port is right here. So you just unscrew this, use argon or nitrogen to purge your system. Whereas on the PVS-14, the purge port is right here on this little hole. So it is right here. Okay. And then next, we're going to talk about the battery port. So the battery port is right here on the RVM-14, held together by this nylon strap, and uses a 3-volt CR123 battery. Whereas on the PVS-14, you have this battery port that takes a AA and is held together by this metal lanyard that is connected to the housing. Okay, the on and off switch, PVS-14, on and off switch right here, along with the setting for the IR illuminator, and it is clearly labeled. On the RVM-14, it is right here in the rear as well. However, it's not labeled on or off. But the cool thing about this one is also the knob acts as your manual gain control. So you click it on to turn it on, and then you turn it further to continue to control your manual gain, which is a pretty cool feature because it integrates the features into one knob. And let's talk about the illuminator. So on the PVS-14, you have your illuminator up front right here. And on the RVM-14, you have it right here, and it is also a push button. There you go. So those are some of the differences. Let's continue. So on the front, you have a D-ring, a metal D-ring, whereas on the PVS-14, you have the infinity stop ring, which is just a circular ring. It's not a D-ring. And the cool thing is, because the RVM-14 uses a D-ring, you do not have to use internal closed focus stop ring for the ejective lens, which is required for the PVS-14 to prevent your lens from unscrewing itself. And because it's metal, it's more durable, whereas on the PVS-14, it's a polymer and has a rough finish. However, the grub screws that set your infinity focus are the same. The RVM-14 uses these shiny metal ones. They're really small. They're really easy to lose as well, so don't lose them. Let me see if I can focus on them. Yeah, so the grub screws are the same. It's just that the RVM-14 ones uses the shiny ones instead of the PVS-14 ones, which are more matte and black. On the rear, you have your ocular outer ring right here. Again, the PVS-14 one is made out of polymer, while the RVM-14 seems to be made out of either metal or a different type of polymer, but it is smoother finish-wise, And also, one thing I noticed was that because this is an aluminum housing, the threads are much easier to work with. Whereas on the PVS-14, they're made out of polymer and really fine, so it's really easy to cross thread these rings on here. But because these are aluminum, it is much easier to thread these on and off, which is really nice. Okay, let's talk about some small parts. So the retaining rings look the same. So this is the one that came with the RVM-14. Um, well, actually, they're a little different. So the ones that came with the RVM-14 has the notches only on one side. So let's focus. Okay, so it has the notches on one side. It is still tapered, but it doesn't have the notches on the back. So on the PVS-14, the retaining rings have notches on both sides to allow for airflow and to equalize the pressure when you're adjusting your diopter. So small difference, but both rings are tapered, and it is, I think, easier to use the RVM-14 ones because you reduce the risk of potentially flipping your ring when you install it because the PVS-14 one has notches on both sides. Just the rule of thumb is the taper side goes into the tube, facing the tube, while the deeper notches face the ocular lens. So just keep that in mind. It is tapered, and you do not want to flip this. The light pipes are a little different as well. So this is the RVM-14 one. A little bit different. And it is not labeled up like the PVS-14 one. So on the PVS-14 one, you have this, and you have this little block that goes into the little slot on the intensifier tube, and it is labeled up on one side to make sure that you install it correctly. But on the RVM-14, it has this little notch for it to sit on the intensifier tube, but it is not labeled up or down. So just be careful. Okay, so those are the physical differences, and I think the next step is to just build them out and see how they build out. I am excited because one thing about building these out, the PVS-14s, is that you really have to be careful about cross-threading on the traditional one because the plastic threads are very fine, so it's really easy to cross-thread them, like I said before. But on the RVM-14, because they are aluminum, it should be easier. All right, let's give it a go. Next, we'll talk about the tools we'll need to complete this build. Okay, so this is everything you need to build out your PVS-14 or RVM-14 in this case. So you have your spanner wrench for your D-ring and the ocular ring. You have your tool to install the retaining ring. You have a 5/64 Allen wrench for the battery housing screws. And you have a very small 0.9 millimeter Allen wrench, and this is for the grub screws for setting your infinity focus. It is so small that it will not focus on me, but it's okay. You get the point. It's about the size of a toothpick, so very small. All right, so I got some argon as well to purge my system. Got some a can of air to clean out the housing and also clean off my surfaces. And you have a multimeter. So this is optional. You don't need this, but I like to measure the voltage in the battery housing to make sure I'm getting a good connection, and I'll explain why later. So I'll set this aside. Oh, and one item that's not on here, but you'll also need is some dielectric grease, because sometimes these housings come pretty dry and you may need to lubricate the threads. All right, let's get started. Okay, so the first thing I did was to dust off my surface to get rid of as much dust as possible, because you don't want dust going into this system and potentially interfering with your image quality. So the next thing I'm going to do is also take these rings off, because When I opened this from the packaging, I noticed that there was some dust on here, and I just want to get rid of all the dust. And again, very easy to unscrew because aluminum threads, not plastic threads. And let's take this all off. Okay, give it a good dusting. And I'm going to do the same for the D-ring. Dust it off as well. Okay, good. So the next thing I'm going to do is take the screws out of the battery housing. So grab your 564. And the silicone mats are great from preventing your parts from rolling around. And this is especially helpful for setting your infinity focus because those grub screws are very small and very easy to lose. Okay, let's be careful to pull this apart. And look at that. It is much more compact and simple than your PVS-14 housing. Now what I'm going to do is put a 3-volt battery in here. And this is completely optional, not required. Because I just want to check to make sure that I don't have a dud battery pack, and that I am getting the voltage I need. And first thing I noticed was that for a PVS-14, the battery nub right here goes inwards, but for an RVM-14, it is flipped. Okay, and also one thing to check is this is more of an issue with PVS-14 battery housings, but you just want to make sure that the tabs right here, the metal tabs right here, let's see if I can focus in, are lifted up and parallel to this line right here. And the reason for that is sometimes coming from the factory, these tabs are pressed downwards, and what that can cause is your tube to not make good contact with these battery tabs, preventing your tube from turning on. So it's just something to watch out for. If that is indeed the case, then you can just very carefully, these are very fragile, to lift them up to make sure that they make proper contact. So it's just something I check. It's not really mandatory, but I like to check it from previous experience. All right, so I'm going to turn this on to give it 3 volts. And I just want to see what voltage is going across it. Yeah, 3.1, so that's fine. So it is giving me what I expected. So that is good. All right, let's take the battery back out. And again, not required, but I just like to check because I'm curious. On the newer Noctis PVS-14 battery housing, you will get a voltage of about 2.2 volts or somewhere around there. It's not really consistent across battery packs. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is to prep my tube. Put that aside. And this is an ELBIT tube, and what you want to check is to make sure there's no smudges or dust on here. There shouldn't be because it came straight from the factory. So just give it a good inspection. And if there is smudges or like debris on here, what you can do is take some cleaning alcohol, put a drop on here, use like a tissue paper to just press and lift to clean off the tube. You could probably get away with like a microfiber cloth too, but you really don't want to like add like a rotating motion on it to prevent any scratches. So just be extra careful because this is the heart of the night vision device and it is also extremely expensive. Okay, so now that that's clean. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is, again, dust off again. And put your intensifier tube inside the housing. And on the RVM-14, I could already tell that the indexing pin is a different material. It is brass, which is very nice. And not like the metal pin that you see in a traditional PVS-14 housing, which is also very easy to bend in a traditional PVS-14 housing. So let's get that in there. Okay, got it in there. Okay, next thing you're going to do is connect your pigtail to the battery housing. Okay. And also on your typical PVS-14 battery housing, you have to be extremely careful torquing these little screws because if you over torque them and they're very sensitive, it will crack the battery housing, the posts on the battery housing. However, on these, it should be less of an issue because it's all aluminum. But again, take the same precaution and just be really careful when you're threading these back on. Because on the 14 housing, even if you like turn it a quarter turn after a quarter turn more after a snug, it will crack the housing. It is a pain because, you know, although it will not affect functionality, it's just an eyesore to see and just an amateur mistake. And I'm just tightening these to get them snug, being very careful to over torque. Just stop when it's snug. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is install my lenses. Okay, got some Carson lenses here. Just give it a good inspection to make sure there's no dust. Okay. And I am going to lubricate the threads right here with some dielectric grease. Alright, so I am going to install the ring now. I mean the lens and the ring. I did apply some dielectric grease on here to help because the housing looked a little dry, but not a big deal. Okay, looks good. All right, so you can tighten this all the way down if you do not want to set your infinity focus stop. If you do want to set it, what you want to do later is take the unit outside after it's completed, turn it on, look at the stars, focus the objective lens onto the stars after you focus your diopter to your eyes. And then after you focus it on the stars, you want to go past it about 10 degrees. And once you're past it, you want to screw the D-ring up to the point that is 10 degrees past your focus point. So just something to think about later. So essentially, typically just eyeballing it, it usually gets moved up to this point, and I stick the grub screw in there and tighten it with that 0.9 millimeter Allen wrench. But for now, I'm going to just keep it flush. Perfect. Okay, so the next part is to give it one more puff of air, and I am going to install the light pipe. So I just want to put it in here, make sure the notch is facing the correct way, and the notch will sit where your EGAC comes out of, right here, this notch. So I just want to press it in place so that it's flush. Alright, just press it in place so that it's flush. Okay, that works. Alright, next thing we're going to do is retaining ring. Again, this ring doesn't have notches on both sides. It only has it on one side, so that makes it pretty simple. So you want to take your tool, make sure to seat it in place, and again, although the threads are not fine plastic, you want to make sure that you don't cross thread. So turn it to the left to hear a click and index. Okay, there we go. And then turn it, make sure you don't cross thread, just be really careful. Just nice and snug. Just make sure that everything looks straight and that the light pipe is sitting in place correctly. Perfect. All right, next thing we're going to do is install our ocular lens. All right, a little trick is to make sure that this part is sticking out all the way so that the threads can engage easier. Yep, just make sure this part is raised all the way up. Perfect. And I'm just going to make sure there's no dust on here. Perfect. And I put some dielectric grease on the threads right here as well. And I'm going to, again, start off, turn it to the left to make sure it indexes and lines up. Okay, there we go. Hit a click. And now we're going to thread it on all the way. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to install the outer ring. So let's do that first. This thing, give it a quick dust. Put it on. Again, start left. Hit a click. There you go. Click. And go all the way down. And it is so much easier with this housing to thread on the ocular outer ring because it is made out of aluminum and not fine plastic. Okay, good. And again, let's try that again. So turn to the left. There you go. And make sure everything is lining up straight. If you feel any resistance, stop, because you may be cross-threading it. Okay. So again, to set your infinity focus stop, what you're going to do is turn this on, point it at the stars, focus on the stars. Once you're focused, turn it an additional 10 degrees past it. Then you want to move the ring up to that point where it stops, and then use your grub screws and screw that in place with your 0.9mm Allen wrench. Or you could just install the grub screw right now when it's flush if you don't care about the infinity stop, but it's up to you. All right, so I'm gonna purge this unit next. So the purge screw is right there this time. And I am going to use this can of argon because I don't have a real nitrogen purge setup, but this is a cheap way to do it, and it works. Okay, purge it, stick the argon in, and I like to do about just 5 seconds, purge it all out. Okay, and after you do that, you want to immediately put this back in. Make sure it's snug. And that's it. Now you have a functional RVM-14. There you go. Cool. All right, let's go test this out. All right, guys, so I ran this unit outside, just gave it a quick test, and here's some thoughts about it. So, like I talked about before, the on and off switch also acts as the gain control knob. So when you hear that click, it automatically turns on using the highest brightness setting. And as you turn the knob clockwise, it will dim your image. So after using this just for a little bit, I came to the realization that I would much prefer it if the the gain setting started off on the low setting rather than the high setting. It just seemed more intuitive to me to start off low, then as you turn the knob, you turn it to the higher setting, and you come back to the low and you click it back off. So that's just one thing. Something else I noticed, this isn't a big deal, just something that I noticed. When you're using the illuminator, sometimes if you tighten the battery cap too tight, this lanyard can get in the way of the illuminator. So if you tighten it too tight, the lanyard will stay in place and will obstruct the view of your illuminator. So that's another thing. And the pros, the illuminator is actually pretty bright and pretty usable. It's not like the PVS-14 one. The one on the RVM-14 is much more powerful and as a result is more usable. And just overall thoughts, I'm very happy with this unit. It just feels more robust and more durable than your traditional PVS-14 housing. And I'm really happy with it. I'm so happy with it that I may just go forward just using exclusively these housings for my future builds. So I really enjoyed building this and testing it out. And if you guys like this video, give me a like, thank you, and have a good day. Bye. And if you guys are curious where I got the ELBIT white phosphor tube from, I got it from Midwest Night Vision. They were not a sponsor. I just bought the tube from them directly, and they were very helpful and they had great customer service. So I highly recommend them. I'll leave a link below.